Welcome back, everyone. We're here with another exciting panel. This time we're going to be talking about building agents and governing agents. I have three great guests with me today to talk about everything agentic. Agents that exist, agents that don't exist, and where we are and where we're headed. Let's start off by having you introduce yourselves, please.
Sure. Really nice to be here. Marcus Ebbesson. I'm head of AI and data platform at Global Connect. So focusing a lot on building AI stuff and AI workflows. Perhaps not so agentic yet, but really excited to be here.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jim Dowling. I'm co-founder and CEO of Hopsworks. Hopsworks is a software platform for developing and operating AI systems at scale. And we are developing agents. I actually gave a quick talk about it earlier on. So when people build AI systems, you have to write what we call pipelines. And we write them typically in Python or Spark. And we now have an early version of an assistant that writes these pipelines from natural language. So it's an agent, it's an agentic approach to make people more productive in building AI systems. So what I motivate my guys with is, let's be first to build AI systems with AI.
Right, yeah, makes sense.
Hey, I'm Steen, senior partner and co-founder of IH Nordic, now director of data innovation. So we're an agency based out of Copenhagen, really focusing on the data activation side of everything. So kind of taking things to the next level. So since we're moving mainly in the marketing space, agents is something that is very high on our agenda because it's moving fast and breaking stuff even faster. Right?
Yeah.
So
I think the word agents popped up about a year ago, something.
Yeah.
It wasn't clear to everybody exactly what agents meant. I think a lot of people that have worked with robotic process automation thought that maybe it was the same thing as RPA plus LLMs, and that's basically what it was. I think it's a bit more than that, but maybe we can start off by sort of describing in our own words what kinds of things we think agents are. Is it the same plus LLMs, or is it something more? What do you think?
Yeah, I think you have to, again, we're building a lot of workflows using AI technologies, but so far they're quite structured in what we want them to do. We've already predefined all the steps they need to take. So agentic, I guess, means more that you give it some type of goal to reach itself, and it can figure out the steps it needs to take.
Right.
And perhaps also decide when to stop.
Right. Okay, so not defining the steps explicitly, I think there's something related to the utility of neural networks and advanced stuff. In the old days, people would compare simpler methods, trees and stuff, to neural networks and say you can do the same thing with trees as you can with neural networks, but there are certain classes of problems that you can't solve with trees that you can solve with neural networks, and I think maybe there are certain classes of problems that you can solve with agents that you can't solve with RPA. If all the rules are known ahead of time, you don't need agents for it. You can just write down the rules, right? It's the convenience of not having to know ahead of time how to solve the problem that seems to be part of what makes agents compelling. Well, I mean, you gave an example of agents just a moment ago.
Yeah, but I mean, I did my PhD in reinforcement learning, distributed reinforcement learning over 20 years ago now, when it wasn't cool. And at the time, agents are still around this notion of planning and then having some form of a reward or cost function that we're optimizing against. So in that sense, all machine learning is around optimization, and agents are also around optimization. And agents, typically, when we talked about them before, they were about an agent would have maybe actions available to that it could take, and you try to optimize the set of actions an agent can take over a time horizon, and then minimize the cost or maximize the reward over that time horizon. And that's my understanding of agents from machine learning. Now, the agents we have today with LLMs are not that kind of agent in my playbook. And if we go back like a couple of years, when people understood that we could go from ChatGPT, which is effectively one large language model, which takes string as input and string as output, and we could build systems. So Berkeley used the term compound AI systems, which never took off. But that basically meant we can use multiple steps to build something which is going to maybe automate some task for us. And I still think we're at that point. Workflows, rather than reward planning agents that we have from the kind of the traditional machine learning infrastructure. But we can get into that later.
No, I think it's good to make that distinction. It's worthwhile because what people are talking about is the other, not the kind that you studied a long time ago, but a new kind of agents. So we can spend some time making that distinction and maybe talk about what's reasonable to expect and sort of what one might be able to do and not the other.
Yeah, I think like just to finish on that point, so there is the main distinction with LLMs is they are what we call autoregressive. So you will predict one token in LLM, and it will use that token to predict the next token, and it will predict the next token. And we've seen that works well for language. But when we move to the notion of an agent that will take many steps and use the next step to predict the next step to predict the next step, autoregressive, if you listen to Jan LeCun, they can go off on the wrong tangent very easily.
Yeah.
I think we're still there. So when I'm trying to build a system, we don't go deep. You just go shallow and you do small.
It's the same for me when we talk agents. It's very much about, well, it's in the name, right? It's agency, something that has its own area of expertise that it will interact within. But it has to be still, like you say, if we give it too much room, then it might go too far. But having this focus of just saying it's very narrow, rather having 7 agents that each have a very narrow area instead of trying to do one agent that covers 7 things. Because that's kind of the complexity. So for us, it's a high degree of freedom within a limited space.
I suppose one thing that could be interesting to sort of kick this off with is with regards to the reliability of agents, because what's a question is, especially if you have a problem that's well defined, where you know all of the circumstances, just like with old AI, if there's only 2 degrees of freedom and it's linear and everything, you don't need a neural network that's over-parameterized to solve that kind of problem. And so it's sort of a false equivalence to try to compare the utility of one versus the other. I mean, the thing that's neat now about agents is not that you couldn't do it in principle if you understood all of the steps to getting there, but we're wanting to offload some trivial stuff. Like the first things that we're seeing now is exactly what HopWorks is implementing, and programming people that don't want to build code bases from scratch. We probably could do that. Ain't nobody got time to write the same kind of boilerplate code for the millionth time. It's better to let an agent figure it out. And I guess this is an interesting talk, maybe just a technicality that's hopefully interesting for the audience, but optimality is never really a thing. We're always talking about good enough. Globally optimal stuff is almost never really necessary, right? What do you think about sort of good enough results with stuff, with code, with the things that agents can do?
I guess starting small is always a good way of doing it, and identifying one process that you want to get rid of doing, for example, like everyone hates writing documentation, for example. That's something we're trying to automate now with, in our data platform, we have to document everything in DBT in our YAML code.
Right.
So can we have an agent parse through where the sources are coming from, and what are those systems, based on all the tables and APIs and columns that you get. What does that mean in the raw layer in our platform? And when you combine it and looking at all the definitions of the models, can we actually automate building a description of that model? And so on.
Well, let me ask, that's a great example. First of all,
that's a really limited example of something that you probably want to.
But also, what is the criticality of getting the documentation flawless versus getting it good enough versus other things?
Yeah, getting something documented is even...
What are we comparing to? I mean, are we comparing no documentation to agent-generated documentation, or are we comparing a professional that's doing it and now we're trying to get an agent to do it for cheaper? What does it tend to be?
I find it's really limited in to what extent DBT models are documented in a professional setting. Sometimes not at all. Sometimes it's just a one-liner, barely describing what it does.
Yeah.
So getting an AI that can help us do this, that means that we will have at least something to look at, and then you can just iterate on that.
I think one of the things that's neat about the feature that you mentioned is even though it might not be the ultimate intelligence assisting you, it's not necessarily replacing what an expert would have done otherwise. It's enabling people that otherwise would not have used the tool at all to do things.
Yeah.
Do you see that opening up new possibilities for users?
I mean, that's why we developed this particular capability. Like at large enterprises, you won't have always the competence. And you think of it as speaking a language, right? Not everyone is fluent with the language of your APIs or the frameworks they're using. And this isn't a way for them to go from their natural language to the APIs of the programming language. But I want to go back to your point about good enough versus... Because that's a really interesting point. And I bring it up in my book. I'll plug my book now. I'm writing a book. It's nearly finished.
What's it called?
It's called Building AI Systems, Batch Real-Time LLMs, O'Reilly.
Okay.
And I mean, there's 6 chapters out now, but it'll be finished in the next month. But what I talk about in the book is when evaluate LLM systems, first, is it subjective or objective output? Because that's the main differentiation we see now. Now, we're building an agent for writing code. The output is objective. We can actually evaluate the output. We basically run the program and see if it did what you expect it to do. And you can write what we call evals.
Right.
So test to make sure that any changes I make in my prompt templates or RAG or in the model that I'm using, that did this make the system better or worse. So I think LLMs are doing very well now at objective tasks. Tasks where we can not necessarily even, everyone talks about LLM as a judge, right? But this is not LLM as a judge. This is literally, I'm outputting a program. Does it work? Does it do what I expected it to do? The other one is subjective outputs, and this is where it's documenting your DBT tasks or writing your essay for your school. And this is where LLM as a judge is useful, because we've seen, obviously, with the growth in chain of thought, that LLMs can actually say, output that. Was it good, though? I don't know if you've seen this joke where they say...
use the AI to check what the output was and see if it was good.
Exactly, and they're good at it, right? Because we see with programs, I don't know if anyone's seen the joke, it's like, you get it to write a program and then say, and now optimize it. Yeah. And then and it's like, how many times do you tell it now optimize it? It keeps getting better, and then at some point it gets worse.
Yeah.
So I think objective optimization is still LLM as a judge, and it's human augmented, and I don't see any clear thing. So I think a lot of the advancements we're going to make in the near future will be based on tasks that LLMs execute that are objective. Yeah. That there's some output that we're able to validate programmatically.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting when you say, like, generate me something and then now make it better.
Yes.
That's a really interesting workflow. And in some sense, it's like, it's an AI with a for loop.
I mean, everyone talks about test time compute now, right? Which is basically what chain of thought is, which is, you ask an LLM to do something, and before you do it, you say, because often we all know that there's something called in-context learning, where we put examples in the prompt, and the AI can learn from that. So what you do is use the LLM to generate the data that's put in the prompt, and say, okay, do some research on this topic before you answer the question. Instead of just one-shotting the question in, you say, do research, put the output in here, now do that. And that's the equivalent of saying do it better, because it's reflecting on what it did.
Like the reasoning models that
that's the chain of thought reasoning models, so... I think, it's hard to know where it's going to go, but like...
Well, I mean, I guess we're sort of touching on 2 tracks which are equally fun and interesting, especially to sort of techie people like us, where you have the what could we potentially do, and maybe which direction should things be headed in order to achieve, really human-like intelligence or beyond human-like intelligence. And then there's an aspect of the utility right now. And one of the things that's always inspired me about PCs in general is how it has given people that otherwise would not have had access to certain tools, now they have access. People that used to have to rent a studio to record drums, you can do it with your PC. People that needed to be able to program before, now you can do it with an LLM. You're not going to be as good as a programmer, but that democratization step is very important. And as with your tool, now you have lots more customers, because now they can use it, whereas you have to be...
Yet.
All right. Well, that will...
Soon.
But there's also a business dimension, right? Because I think for us, we are very... a lot of our decisions has a lot of consequences. So we try to separate this classic Jeff Bezos saying, is this a one-way or two-way door? If the agent makes this decision, can we change it? Or can't we change it? If we tell it to, okay, run this marketing budget, then the money's burned.
Yeah.
Right? So how much risk are we willing to take? And that's kind of where we feel right now it's interesting area to explore, but it's not getting free access to the budgets and the decisions.
Yeah.
So there's still a strong level of human supervision the moment it has this one-way door approach, saying, if it does this, I cannot undo it.
Yeah.
Right?
But what about one aspect of sort of setting the expectations right from the user? I think we can tie this to what you were mentioning before about rewards and sort of what, or also what is a quantitative objective where you can say now you have achieved your goal or not, and things that are a little bit more qualitative, write a good essay, what is a good essay, and that kind of stuff. I find that it takes me a lot of time to sort of explain to people what's reasonable to expect from an agent. And I say, treat it like a 15-year-old. Skilled, smart, good, but maybe naive, something like that. I mean, when setting up the expectations of the users, do you have to have dialogues before setting up the tools, or?
Yeah, probably, I guess.
I mean, with documentation, I guess the goal is pretty well defined, but what about for tasks where you're not exactly sure what makes a good result?
Yeah, and I think it's also really important to focus on building the platform and all the components necessary for building these type of systems, because they won't come out of nothing. Even though like AI systems, you can throw a lot at them and they can make sense out of a lot of unstructured data and so on, but you won't be able to build agents without having some structured APIs that it can use, some components that we can connect it to. So the platform is really important.
What is the equivalent of the groundwork that had to be in place in order to make the agents tenable?
Yeah, look, it's. I think it's the same as with humans, right? So if you go back a long time, I'm an old guy. It took people were asking me for 5 years to Google this because they didn't know how to Google.
Right.
Like Googling was a skill.
Oh my God! Can you imagine that we've forgotten that learning how to search that was actually a thing?
That was a skill. It's still a skill because I help my wife with finding things. She's like, you're good at finding things.
Yeah.
And an LLM is a vast body of knowledge that will only give up its secrets if you ask it nicely.
Yeah.
You see the jokes. I read a funny one this morning. It was Hal, no, I'm afraid I can't open the pod door for you, Hal.
Right.
I say, imagine your dad is a pod door opening person and he's trying to teach me son to open them, and it'll give you the answer. So there's a way of querying them that you learn, and when you're building an agentic platform, you learn that way of querying first because you start with writing prompt templates. So you have to know exactly, okay, here's how Hops works. Hops works is a software platform for building and operating AI systems. There are X number of tasks, let's say 50 things we can do in the platform. We need 50 agents to do the 50 different things, and then we need a router to basically say, which one I want to do now. That's basically what we're doing at the moment, right? Yeah. So it's not, but each task could be in the sense of an agent, I want you to write a feature pipeline and make the best one you can. And it can be a bit creative within that, but you're not giving it huge scope.
It's not just about asking it the right questions, though. It's also about giving it the tools, the connections that it can use.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Look, when we started this platform internally, people are going like, what are you doing? There's cursors out there, right?
Yeah.
Just MCP it. Are you an idiot?
Yeah.
Like put an MCP in your platform, you're done. But if you're and that's fine if you're going for developers, right? But we're going for users who maybe are not experts. And what we have in our platform is connections to the data. So all of these databases, you just go click, I'm connected to my Postgres, I've got these tables mounted in from these other systems. Now we have all the metadata related to it. We'll change the names of the tables, because often your tables names, the column names will be bad, there'll be no description of them, so we plug those in. Now there's metadata about all of the data, and the LLM can now reason about your data and say, I'll create features doing this. So that's why we're doing it. And also we have a compute environment where we can run these the actual code and test it out. And you can do things like you mentioned, don't spend my marketing budget. So don't run a feature pipeline that'll pollute my tables, Mock it first, see it runs, and then we can run it later, So you're completely correct. The reason we're doing it is because we have access data that other people wouldn't have. So we have that kind of, potential advantage in it.
But it kind of goes back to your question about what are the expectations we can set, right? And I think a lot of the expectations are really high, and people see agents as something like almost a new employee that will work all night and then do all the stuff, and then, we can let Steen go because we have agent Steen and can do the same thing, and it's like, maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe not this quarter.
But let's see if we can converge on some idioms here. I think what both of you were touching on, in my ears, it sounds like there's an aspect of knowledge distillation here, right? So what is a marketing move like? You can either leave it to this 15-year-old to try and figure out how to market something, or if you guys have a strategy, this is how we always do marketing. The agent needs to have access to that kind of knowledge distillation, and in a lot of cases, it's just in people's heads. Nobody's taking the time to write down, if you want to do things with HopsWorks the right way, this is how a professional would do it. They would follow these steps. It's structured. They have a strategy and best practices. And what I've found is that taking the time to distill that knowledge is almost more work than the actual engineering itself. It's hidden in people's heads.
Because if you're going to have an agent that acts as a knowledge worker, then it has to have access to the onboarding documentation that everyone else gets when they're onboarded as an employee at the company. So you triggered my curiosity there. So is that something that you would connect to also, like connecting, for example, to a Confluence area where we have all the documentation around all our best practices and how we build things and how we work? And how do you then solve the governance around it, like what it should have access to and not?
I mean, for us, we have a security model where you break up a system or decompose into projects, and they're isolated sandboxes, and then you have an owner of the project, and they decide who can get the data. So that's what limits the data that's inside it. But back to your question, I think a really interesting trend here is just how do I get the knowledge in, right? If it's in my head, I can say it once. It's in context learning. It's put I put it in the query. And if I realize I'm good, I'll put it in the prompt template. Now it's in the prompt template. I don't need to put it in every time. And then people say, well, now I go to RAG. But I think the interesting point we're at now is that big context window, large context window models with 1 million tokens that go into them, they can put your documentation all in there. I don't need to put it in a vector index and just take it, because when we had a small context window, we had to try and find the relevant data, within using vector indexes primarily. I have a different take. We have a different take. So I don't think all enterprise data will end up in vector index. We have vector index in our platform, so I don't have skin in the game that way. But enterprise data is not going to end up in those platforms. It's not designed to store all of the enterprise data. So I think the key to actually getting enterprise data into LLMs is IDs. I'll give you what I mean by that. So if I have an application I'm building and I'm logged in and I'm doing something, I'll have an identity. Maybe the thing I'm doing, the task will have an identity. Maybe I have an order has an identity. Maybe the product has an identity. Those identities are the keys to get to the enterprise data. It will be with MCP, but that data will not. It will be using primary key lookups or index scans, not similarity search with RAG. And I'm not sure, with large context windows, how much RAG we'll need. If we can just dump it all in, like Cursor does today, it just downloads everything and has this huge context window. They don't need to do vector indexes, which is not as reliable.
Yeah. I feel like it's a little bit unreasonable to expect today's language models to solve very complicated things. I've, in the work that I've been doing recently, gotten into two kinds of projects. One is this distillation step, where we ask our employees to write down in very detail a very small step that they do. How do you translate subtitles professionally? And it's one step, and they'll give a giant system prompt, and then we have that in a content management system so that an LLM can use that and become one of those agents for just that little step. But the second thing is, if I were to ask you, analyze this data, how would you do it? And you'd be like, well, okay, maybe I would structure it in a certain way, I would use a certain tool, I would do this and that. And rather than ask the LLM to do all of it, I'm thinking it's better to get the LLM to do it step by step the way you would do it, perhaps, rather than expect it to sort of process it in its mind in a single step. Yeah. But this sort of step-by-step thing, I guess the question is how to organize the company to sort of
so this is something
converge around.
This is actually the biggest insight we made at the beginning, right? Well, apart from the fact that generating SQL is very hard. That was the first insight. But the second one was you should not go from text in our case, to a programming language, to Python. If you go from text to Python, that only works for developers.
Right.
Because if I generate the code, there is a reverse direction, but the non-expert person can't read that output
right.
and iteratively improve it.
Right.
So if you look at Lovable, and Lovable's been very successful, and I think the key thing with Lovable that we're trying to apply as well is that in Lovable, you write down what you'd like to have, and the intermediate representation is the web page. Nobody's looking at the JavaScript that's being spit out. Right. There is an intermediate representation, we'll call it specification, or a domain-specific representation, that you can look at, and you can see if you've improved it. I'm not a JavaScript programmer, I can see it, it's moving that, everything looks good. No, I don't care what the JavaScript is, that's what's at the bottom. There is a specification that I can understand as a domain expert, and I can improve, iteratively improve. So we're doing that like for the pipelines that will give, if you're a domain expert, you can see, I want to create these features, I want to do this in natural language, and then the code gets generated. So I think for your case, your experts, if they want to iteratively improve something, you need to give it to them in their language, and then the thing that's output, maybe the steps or the process or whatever, that's maybe something they don't need to be an expert.
I mean, you've touched on a really great point, which is, I think we probably can agree that the reason ChatGPT became big was because it was a user experience breakthrough rather than a machine learning breakthrough, right? It was, we had the GPT models, there were other more advanced models even at the time, but people liked to chat with it as if they were chatting in a chat application. And that was the main sort of user experience breakthrough in how people wanted to interface with the tool. And the question is now, sort of what interfaces can we give? And to your point, Lovable, precisely that the user can determine themselves whether the output is good or not, is what makes it more compelling than something that generates just code or something like that. So I'm thinking with one thing I brought up last year was the idea of an AI product manager. And it doesn't matter what it's called, but the idea that you have somebody in the business that's sort of vested in the success of the outputs of the AI service or product that you're building internally. Because, I mean, in my opinion, only the user can really determine if it's performing as expected, and ideally on some kind of business, right? So a marketing person is the only person that can really tell if the marketing is executed successfully. I can't do that, I'm a computer nerd.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges that we see is actually also about the ownership of the AIs.
Right.
Because you have this saying, you put all your knowledge into this agent, so is it yours when you leave the company?
Yeah.
Because this is actually an extension of you, and do you get extra, how do you get compensated for that? Because technically, once you put in all your processes, so long, buddy.
Okay, but let's talk. This is a great one. I actually met this woman at Telia, the telco here in Sweden, that had such a cool idea. She said, if you can automate your job, I'll give you a year off and a promotion when you get back, because obviously you're overqualified and you were able to automate what you were doing.
They lost a year then.
It is fun. Well, they're still getting the work done. I just thought it was very clever. And so the question is, if you go to any tech guy, they're like, can you automate your work? They'll be like, no, I do ad hoc stuff. It just requires so much finesse and whatnot.
Yeah.
But what are you supposed to be doing? And I don't know, maybe 60% of what you're doing is supposed to be well described, and the rest is sort of improvised stuff. I mean, do you think that makes it, are we able to make agents that can account for that 60%, or does it have to be the whole role for it to be usable? Back to this sort of, is it good enough kind of thing?
I think it should be like you said, we're breaking it down, so the agent should be able to take parts. It shouldn't be the whole role,
right?
Because you would be too limited. So, looping back to us, where pre-COVID we did a 4-year project where we looked at our own processes, change management, pre-AI, everything, and then moved everybody in the company from a 4-day work week to a 4-day work week, 30 hours, full salary, because we worked smarter, not harder, right? And now technically what we're talking about is saying, could we do the same again and then go to 2 days using AIs and agents and to do it? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
But who gets the value? And that's where it becomes a business discussion, right? Because then suddenly it's a commercial issue saying, who runs away with the credit?
I think it's easier to justify stuff that hasn't been done before. I mean, if there was no documentation, then you can justify it with it being good enough. For doctors, if they don't have time to look at every single patient journal every day like they should be doing because they don't have enough time, then having an AI do it might be better than not doing it at all. I mean, do we think that a lot of the work is like that? I guess giving these tools to people that weren't able to use them before is a version of that, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's ethical questions and all this. I think, the way if we take medicine, I've had health issues, I have kids with health issues, and I do the research myself. So, I would use an AI 100% to do research on medical conditions. And I think, I'm not sure society is ready though either because of the implication. Like the principle, at least of health, is do no harm. That's the kind of the motto of doctors. So, but they'll let you do harm to yourself. So you can go off and do the LLMs yourself, and no one's really going to stop you. I think that's where we are today, kind of like on that particular issue.
Maybe we can tie this to something super interesting. In my opinion, one of the main strengths of Western medicine is that it's not a theory, it's a process. Sort of like the scientific method. We don't expect any one doctor to be infallible or any one scientist to be infallible, but we expect there to be a kind of process of self-correction. And I do feel that maybe AI and agents can be a support in a process rather than sort of a solution to something in its entirety. Right? I mean, maybe a tool for an expert that can...
So I have 2 kids with cystic fibrosis, which is a pretty serious disease, and I'm been active on forums. And my experience is that actually social forums is where so the LLMs do not have the knowledge, and they will never have the knowledge when you have a rare condition. If it's a common condition, I think they'll be quite good. You've got a skin mole. I saw somebody tweeted recently that they took a photo of themselves and GPT said, you better look at that mole.
Yeah.
And it was cancerous. That's great. But I think when it's a rare condition, I think social media is incredible because all the parents of kids with this condition, and they're all talking, sharing stories. I had a heart condition. I actually wrote a paper in Karolinska. I co-authored a paper with my professors because we found a treatment, and I communicated with people on Facebook about this. Because that's where information is shared privately. It won't be available to the GPTs.
I see.
People because when you have very rare things, the knowledge doctors don't have that. There's 50,000 rare diseases. Doctors don't know this, but patients can share a lot of info and be very well read themselves.
I think society scale problems. There's a very interesting thing to try and see if we can do knowledge dissemination in interesting ways. I guess maybe if we bring it back now to sort of within a company. And we think about knowledge dissemination and stuff like that. One of the first agents I built was an agent whose own, if you call it that, was an agent whose only job was to figure out who in the company knew something. So at a telco, who is it that knows about fiber optic networks? The guy that installed this thing here 15 years ago. And it'll go and say, do you know? And you're like, no, but there's maybe a group over here that knows. And it'll say, okay, I'll get back to you. Yeah. And it built a little network of who knows who and who knows what. And that network was maybe useful for something, who knows, but it built it anyway. But I think knowledge dissemination and tool access and all that kind of stuff is a pretty compelling use case.
Especially if you keep it updated. Because the challenge is that knowledge is evolving, right? So you will there will come more layers of knowledge, and a core product in this thing will change.
Yeah.
So suddenly this is completely obsolete about this fiber optics because it's out of the market. So what's in replace, and then having this employee being able to point to that person. I think that's
the
really
same
good.
thing with documentation or onboarding documentation, that it has a tendency to become outdated. So automating that process and having something continuously improving on it, that's would be very beneficial.
Well, what are low-hanging fruit then? What would we say? With advanced analytics, everybody points to sales prediction, sales forecasting, that kind of stuff, basic stuff that maybe everybody might have utility from, but what about with agents? Are there commonalities and low-hanging fruits with automation in big enterprises?
I think BI is doomed, in the near term. So massive companies like Tableau and unfortunately Click, who are Swedish, it would be nice to see them, but I think it's very hard for them because all you're doing is querying your data, generating dashboards. Most of that is automatable. I mean, I have a friend he was probably the first person I know to be automated out of a job by LLMs. He did a translation business.
Right.
And he wasn't hurt by Google Translate. Google Translate was good, but it wasn't good enough. And he kept going into business until 2023. And then the end of 2023, it just dried up. That was it. He was gone. And I think that's the way it's going to happen in a lot of jobs. And BI will be one of them. That's my prediction.
Okay, BI first. What else?
But I disagree somewhat because I think in some cases it will be night and day like that with translation, for example. All of a sudden it's just too easy to do with LLMs, so that just replaces it. But in other cases, I think it will rather be that you're trying to automate some process. So you're building a pipeline of some sort to do that, and maybe you're using LLMs throughout the steps, and then you can do that in a structured way to begin with, and then perhaps take the agentic step later. So I think they can also evolve over time into a fully automated and agentic process rather than just night and day like that. So
maybe it has to do with sort of how commoditized it is, because I think most large enterprises have some sort of BI system or sort of data insights system, and if there's enough business to be made in automating it really, really with a lot of finesse, maybe that'll become commoditized.
Yeah, but combined with the saving, right?
Yeah.
You kind of do the double saying you both have the chance to commoditize and getting a competitive advantage, and also saving at the same time. That's dream come true for many, right?
I want to pivot the discussion a little bit to something that I've asked some previous panels here about, one of my favorite topics, which is doing things the hard way, or waiting for a service on Azure to pop up where you press yes and it just works, or in Hops works, right? What do you guys think about because obviously agent stuff is very much in its nascent stage. It doesn't work well. It's duct tape, hack and slash. And maybe you're just setting yourself up for a headache for marketing spend to be budget to be burnt up. Is there any value in doing things the hard way and trying to do this stuff now, or should one wait for like a year? What do you guys think?
I love hacking stuff, so of course you should try it out.
Yeah.
I think it's the decision process, right? Because if you hack now, then you're much more qualified to take the decision in a year. Then you understand. I have this. A lot of people talk about the next generation being the digital natives, and I think, well, that's true for half of them, but the other half is digital naives. They have no idea what's going on, and we don't want to be the people who don't know what's going on because we don't hack it.
Yeah.
We need to know what's happening under the hood to be able to, because otherwise we'll never get ahead. We'll always just be in the middle with everybody else.
Right.
I'm going to call it a cultural challenge. It's the European challenge, right? The risk reward.
Right.
And Europeans are traditionally, we've not been the early adopters, the inventors. We're always waiting until it gets to a service on Azure. Azure are biggest in the world in the Nordics, by the way, And I think that's exactly what we should be doing, is acquiring the skills. But unfortunately, I say this as a vendor, there is a long tail in value creation with AI. I give an example of TikTok, right? So you can build TikTok on our platform, Hopsworks. It is the most valuable AI system. It has created so much value. Its differentiation is the digital crack, the real-time recommendations it gives you. But then there's so many AI projects that just don't go anywhere. And I think, like you said, a lot of people go like, look, we tried that, didn't work, let's not do it. It's an existential risk. If you may see at some point that, we need to do something, but if you don't have the skills, you're done.
You don't have you're not qualified to make a decision.
Yeah.
It's like
you mightn't go all in, but you get the skills, and then take the decision when you need to go all in. If it appears that someone's doing this better than us, we need to do it as well, or go out of business.
You're one of the first people that has said that the upside to hacking is learning stuff. And everybody thinks that, it means you get this tool before everybody else, and you might not. No. But in my opinion, what you learn is much more important than the output of the hacking process. I guess one last thing is sort of who gets to learn, and I feel that always the engineers feel like it's the business people that need to skill up, and the business people maybe feel like the tech people, they're too small, they're not able to do all the stuff that we ask them to do. But both of them benefit just as much from getting better at this mindset stuff. It's not so much specific skills as it is being good at being an entrepreneur kind of thing. Let's finish this off with some hot takes for the coming year. I asked the panel before if this is the year of agents or not, and one person said last year was the year of agents. This year, right? So agents, are they going to be commoditized in tools you maybe have an answer for your own product. How fast is this going to go? What would
I
you
think
say?
it's objective. It's the year of agents for objectively evaluated tasks.
Okay.
That's it. Tasks. So workflows, let's call them.
Agents for objectively evaluated workflows.
Very long.
What do you say?
Oh,
I mean, you're already working on it, so you
Yeah.
can't say it's not the beginning of the year at least.
no, I think we'll make some cool prototypes this year. Yeah.
And are they a little bit valuable, not valuable, or very valuable?
I think we'll be using our. We'll have to look after them a lot while we're doing them. I think.
But the value of the skills,
Yeah.
right?
We'll learn a lot.
Yes,
as well.
yes, yes.
That's the
Exactly. So,
important.
like you said, this is the year of hacking agents.
Yeah.
So next year, when they get standard, or next year after that, when they get commoditized, we know what the heck is going on.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? 40 minutes went super fast with this panel. It was a great talk having you all here. Hope you all enjoyed
for
that.
having me.
Hope you start off with your hacking journey with agents yourselves. Thanks for being with us. Thanks to everybody. And we will be back shortly. See you soon.